I never thought I'd have to prove my own father's love for me after he was gone. But there she was, Victoria, my stepmother, of just 3 years, standing in the lawyer's office with a document that erased 3 decades of his promises. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Your father changed his mind, she said, not even trying to hide her smile. The family business goes to me now. What she didn't know was that my father never fully trusted her, and he'd left me insurance against exactly this moment. My name is Michael Bennett, 35 years old, and until 6 weeks ago, I was the presumed heir to Bennett Construction, the company my father Robert built from nothing in Portland, Oregon. Dad started with a single truck and a toolbox back in 1985. I grew up watching him transform that humble beginning into a regional powerhouse that employed over 70 people and handled commercial projects across 3 states. From the time I was 16, I spent every summer and school break learning the business from the ground up. Dad insisted I learn everything, from pouring concrete and framing walls to balancing books and negotiating contracts. Nobody respects a boss who can't do the work himself, he'd tell me. By the time I finished college with my business degree, I knew every aspect of Bennett Construction inside and out. When I officially joined the company 12 years ago, it was with the clear understanding that I was being groomed to take over someday. Dad made no secret of it, told clients, employees, everyone. "This is Michael," he'd say with his hand on my shoulder. "He'll be running this place when I'm gone." For a decade, we worked side by side, building the company even further, expanding into sustainable development and winning awards for our innovative approaches to urban renewal projects. Then Mom passed away from cancer 4 years ago. Dad was devastated. They'd been married for 33 years. For almost a year he seemed lost, going through the motions at work, but with the light gone from his eyes. I tried my best to pick up the slack, working harder than ever to keep the company strong while he grieved. That's when Victoria Carrington entered the picture. She was a real estate agent who worked with us on several properties. 15 years younger than Dad, with an expensive wardrobe and calculated charm. I still remember the first time she stopped by the office with just a few questions about a listing. She made a beeline for Dad's office, bringing coffee. "Just how you like it." I was surprised when Dad mentioned they'd had dinner to discuss a potential development, then shocked when 3 months later he told me they were dating. "She makes me feel alive again, Michael," he said when he saw my expression. I wanted to be happy for him. I really did. After watching him in so much pain after Mom died, how could I begrudge him finding some joy? But something about Victoria never felt right, the way her smile never quite reached her eyes. How she'd drop little comments about modernizing the company when Dad wasn't in earshot. How quickly she transitioned from calling me Michael to Mike, despite my corrections. They married after just 8 months of dating. A small ceremony at an expensive resort in Hawaii. Just the 3 of us and a handful of Victoria's friends. None of Dad's old friends were invited. "Just a simple celebration," Victoria had insisted. "Robert doesn't need the stress of planning something elaborate." After the wedding, things changed quickly. Dad, who had always been at the office by 6:30 every morning, started coming in at 9, sometimes 10. "Victoria thinks I should ease into retirement," he'd explain with a shrug that didn't seem like him at all. Meanwhile, she began showing up at the office regularly, sitting in on meetings she had no role in, offering opinions on projects she didn't understand. I tried talking to Dad about it once. "She's just trying to be supportive," he said. But there was something uncertain in his voice. "She has some good ideas about expanding the business." Then came the diagnosis. Pancreatic cancer, already stage 4. The doctors gave him 6 months, maybe less. I was shattered, but determined to make his final days comfortable and peaceful. Victoria seemed oddly calm about the whole thing. "We need to get his affairs in order," was her first response when we left the doctor's office. Dad declined rapidly over the next few weeks. As he became weaker, Victoria took charge of everything. His medication schedule, his visitors, his paperwork. She hired a private nurse who reported directly to her and limited my time with Dad to short, supervised visits. "He tires so easily," she'd say, ushering me out after 20 minutes while she stayed by his side for hours. I knew something was wrong when Dad's oldest friend, Charlie Morgan, called me. Charlie had been Dad's right-hand man since the early days of the company, semi-retired now, but still a trusted advisor and board member. "Michael," he said, his voice unusually serious, "have you seen the new estate plan Victoria's been talking about?" I hadn't. In fact, I'd been systematically blocked from all financial and legal discussions. "Your father doesn't want you worried about these things," Victoria would insist. "He wants you focused on running the company." Charlie hesitated before continuing. "She's been meeting with a new lawyer, not Richard Sullivan. Sullivan had been our family attorney for decades. I don't like it, Michael. Something doesn't add up." The next day I tried to speak with Dad alone, but Victoria was there as always, hovering. Dad seemed heavily medicated, his eyes struggling to focus. "Dad," I said, leaning close, "is there anything you want to tell me about the company, about your wishes?" Before he could answer, Victoria smoothly interjected, "We've taken care of everything, haven't we, Robert?" Her hand closed around his on the blanket. "Michael doesn't need to worry." Dad's eyes met mine for a moment, and I thought I saw something there. Urgency, maybe, or apology. But then he closed his eyes, too weak to continue. 3 days later, Dad's private nurse called me at 3 a.m. "You should come now," she said quietly. "It won't be long." I raced to the house, but when I arrived, it was already too late. Dad had passed just minutes before. Victoria was there, of course, dry-eyed and already on the phone with the funeral home. She barely acknowledged my arrival, just waved dismissively toward the bedroom where my father's body lay. I sat with him, in shock, until the mortuary staff arrived, wondering how everything had gone so wrong so quickly. The funeral was a blur. Victoria controlled every aspect, from the understated service to the brief, impersonal eulogy delivered by a minister who had never met my father. I wasn't asked to speak. Most of Dad's old friends were relegated to back rows while Victoria's social circle occupied prominent positions. Charlie Morgan sat beside me, his weathered face grim. "This isn't right," he muttered. "None of this is what Rob would have wanted." 1 week after the funeral, Victoria's new lawyer, Martin Graves, called a meeting to discuss the estate. I arrived at his sleek downtown office to find Victoria already there, dressed in a tailored black suit that somehow managed to look more fashionable than mournful. Charlie came with me, though Victoria raised her eyebrows at his presence. "As you know," Graves began, sliding a document across the polished table, "Robert made some significant changes to his estate plan in his final weeks." I reached for the document, but Victoria placed her manicured hand on it first. "It's quite straightforward," she said. "Robert left the house and his personal effects to me, of course, and he made me the sole owner of Bennett Construction, with full authority to manage or sell as I see fit." The room seemed to tilt sideways. "That's not possible," I said, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. "Dad always intended for me to take over the company. We had an agreement." Graves gave me a practiced, sympathetic look. "I understand this must be difficult for you, Mr. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Bennett, but the will is quite clear. Your father did provide for you." He glanced at his notes. "With a cash bequest of $100,000, which Mrs. Bennett will arrange to have transferred to your account." $100,000. After 12 years of dedicated work, after a lifetime of promises. It was insulting, deliberately so, I suspected, looking at Victoria's carefully composed expression. "There must be some mistake," Charlie interjected, his voice tight with anger. "Rob Bennett would never cut his son out of the company he was raised to run." Victoria's smile didn't waver. "People change their minds, Mr. Morgan. Robert and I discussed the future extensively during his illness. He came to believe that the company would benefit from fresh leadership, perhaps even a buyer who could take it national." "You're planning to sell?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "I've already had preliminary discussions with Westlake. Developments," Victoria replied smoothly. "They've been wanting to enter the Portland market for some time. Westlake Developments was a corporate giant known for buying family businesses, stripping their assets, and discarding their employees. Everything my father had built would be dismantled within months." "This is wrong," I said, standing up. "My father would never have agreed to this. Never." "Yet here's his signature," Victoria replied, tapping the document. "Properly witnessed and notarized just 3 weeks before his passing. He was of sound mind. Mr. Graves can attest to that." Graves nodded solemnly. "I spoke with Robert at length about his wishes. He was quite clear." I looked at Charlie, who seemed as stunned as I felt. "We need a copy of this," he said firmly, "and we'll need time to review it with our own attorney." Victoria shrugged. Elegantly. "Of course, though I don't see what good it will do. The document is legally binding." As we left the meeting, I felt hollowed out, not just because of what I'd lost, but because I couldn't understand how my father could have betrayed me this way. It went against everything I thought I knew about him. "This stinks to high heaven," Charlie said as we stood on the sidewalk outside. "Rob would never do this to you, Michael. Never." I nodded numbly. "But what can we do? If that's his signature?" Charlie's eyes narrowed. "First thing, we talked to Richard Sullivan. If anyone would know Rob's true intentions, it's him." Sullivan met us in his office that same afternoon, his usually cheerful face grave as we explained the situation. "This is concerning," he said slowly. "Robert and I had completed a comprehensive estate plan just last year. It was quite different from what you're describing." Hope flickered for the first time since the meeting. "You have a copy?" Sullivan nodded. "Of course. Robert was explicit that you would take over the company, Michael. We even structured things to minimize the tax burden of the transition." He frowned. "But if he signed a new will, legally, that would supersede our work." "Could he have been coerced?" Charlie asked bluntly. "He was heavily medicated toward the end." Sullivan looked uncomfortable. "That's very difficult to prove, especially with a properly executed document." "What about capacity?" I asked. "In those last weeks, he was often confused." "Again, challenging but not impossible," Sullivan replied. "The problem is if this new lawyer met with him and determined he was of sound mind." He sighed. "We'd need strong evidence to counter that." I drove home in a daze, my mind racing through possibilities, none of them promising. My apartment felt empty and foreign. On the kitchen counter sat a small box, the only item I'd taken from Dad's study after his death. It contained old photos and a few mementos I couldn't bear to leave in Victoria's hands. I opened it now, sifting through the contents. Dad and me, at my college graduation. A small stone paperweight I'd given him for Father's Day when I was 12. His favorite fountain pen. At the bottom was a flash drive I didn't recognize, labeled simply MB in Dad's handwriting. My initials. I plugged it into my laptop, not sure what to expect. A folder opened containing a single video file dated just 6 weeks ago, when Dad was sick but still lucid. With trembling fingers, I clicked play. Dad's face filled the screen. He looked thin and tired, but his eyes were clear and determined. He was seated in his home office, the room dim except for his desk lamp. "Michael," he began, his voice weaker than I remembered, but steady. "If you're watching this, then things have probably gone wrong, and for that I'm deeply sorry." He paused, collecting himself. "I made a terrible mistake with Victoria. I see that now. Too late, maybe, but I see it." My heart pounded as he continued. "She's been different since the diagnosis, pushing me to change my will, to sign papers I haven't fully read. There's always an excuse. I'm too tired. The lawyers are waiting. It's just a formality." He looked down briefly. "I've been weak, son. The medication makes it hard to think sometimes, and she's always there, always insistent." He leaned closer to the camera. "But hear me now. I have never, would never cut you out of Bennett Construction. That company is your birthright. Everything I built was always meant for you." Tears blurred my vision as Dad continued. "I'm recording this as insurance. Victoria doesn't know. She thinks I'm resting." He held up a document. "This is my true will, the one Richard Sullivan and I prepared last year. It leaves the company to you, with provisions for the employees we both care about. There's a copy in Sullivan's office and another." He paused, thinking. "Another in the place where you found your first hammer. You'll remember." I did remember. When I was 9, Dad had hidden a child-sized hammer in the hollow of the old oak tree in our backyard, leading me on a treasure hunt to find it. It was the day he first took me to a construction site. "One more thing, Michael. Check the medicines. He stopped, looking toward the door suddenly. "Someone's coming. Remember, son, I trust you with everything I've built. Never doubt that." The video ended abruptly. I sat in stunned silence, emotions crashing over me in waves, grief, validation, rage. Dad hadn't betrayed me. He'd been betrayed himself, possibly even... I couldn't finish the thought. It was too terrible to contemplate. I called Charlie immediately, my voice shaking as I explained what I'd found. "We need to get to the house," I said. "There's another copy of the real will hidden there, and Dad mentioned something about his medications." "I'll pick you up in 20 minutes, Charlie replied, the old determination back in his voice. "And Michael, bring that flash drive." On the drive to what had been my family home, Charlie and I strategized. Victoria had changed the locks after the funeral, but I still had the spare key to the back gate that Dad had always kept hidden in a fake rock near the garage. The house was dark when we arrived. Victoria was out at some charity function, according to her social media, that I'd hastily checked before leaving. We entered through the back, moving quietly through the garden I'd helped Dad plant years ago. The old oak tree still stood at the edge of the property. I made my way directly to it, feeling along the familiar hollow with my flashlight until my fingers touched something wrapped in plastic. The document was there, just as Dad had promised. Back in the house, we moved quickly. I knew exactly where. Dad kept his medications in the master bathroom while Charlie took photos of the document, sending them immediately to Sullivan. The medicine cabinet contained a dozen prescription bottles. I photographed each one, noting the dosages and instructions. One in particular caught my attention, a pain medication that specifically warned against combining with alcohol or sedatives. Yet right beside it sat a prescription for a powerful sedative, with Victoria listed as the one authorized to administer both. "Charlie," I called softly, "look at this." He examined the bottles, his expression darkening. "We need to take samples of these, and we should check his home office. See if there's anything else Victoria didn't want you to find." Dad's office was the one room that still felt like him. Victoria hadn't yet redecorated it. The bookshelves still held his engineering manuals. The walls still displayed photos of completed projects. His desk, however, had been cleared of papers. I tried the drawers. Locked. But I knew where Dad kept the key, taped under the right-hand drawer. Some habits never changed. Inside, I found a notebook in Dad's handwriting, dated entries from his final months. The most recent entries were disturbing. V brought new papers today, too tired to read them. She says it's urgent. And later, something wrong with new. Medication, can't stay awake. V says doctor increased dosage, but it doesn't feel right. The final entry, dated just days before his death, told V I needed to speak with Michael alone. She refused, beginning to understand her real intentions, must find way to warn Michael. He never got the chance for that warning, but he'd prepared nonetheless, leaving me the video and the hidden will. We gathered everything we could, the medications, the notebook, the will, and left before Victoria returned. Back at my apartment, we contacted Sullivan again, sending him photos of everything we'd found. This is significant, he said, after reviewing the evidence. The video alone creates serious questions about his capacity when signing the new will. Combined with the medication issues in his journal, he paused. We have grounds to challenge Michael, strong grounds. The next morning, we filed an emergency petition with the probate court, presenting our evidence and requesting an immediate freeze on any transfers of assets or company control. By afternoon, the judge had granted our request, along with an order for full toxicology testing on the medication samples we'd provided. Victoria was furious. She called repeatedly, left threatening messages, even showed up at my apartment, screaming that I was trying to steal what was rightfully hers. I didn't engage. The evidence would speak for itself. The court hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. In that time, more evidence emerged. The private nurse, freed from Victoria's employment, came forward with a sworn statement that Victoria had been administering medications at much higher doses than prescribed, particularly before meetings with the lawyer. The toxicology report confirmed that some of Dad's prescription bottles contained combinations of medications that didn't match their labels, potentially dangerous combinations that would have left him confused and compliant. Most damning of all, Graves, Victoria's lawyer, faced with potential ethics violations and criminal charges, admitted that Victoria had been the one to explain Robert's new wishes to him. He had only spoken briefly with my father, who had seemed distant during their meeting. On the day of the hearing, I sat with Charlie and Sullivan, watching as Victoria entered with a new attorney, her confident facade beginning to crack around the edges. When the judge ordered the video played in open court, she visibly paled. The judge was unequivocal in her ruling. The new will was invalidated on grounds of undue influence and lack of testamentary capacity. Dad's original estate plan was reinstated in full. Bennett Construction would come to me, just as he had always intended. But that wasn't the end. Based on the evidence presented, the district attorney opened an investigation into Victoria's actions, including potential elder abuse and medical endangerment. She left the courthouse in disgrace, facing not just the loss of her anticipated windfall, but possible criminal charges. 2 months later, I stood in front of the Bennett Construction headquarters, addressing our employees. The company Dad built, that we built together, would continue its legacy. No corporate takeover, no mass layoffs, just the vision he had always held for our future. My father believed in building things that last, I told them. Not just structures, but relationships, community, trust. He taught me that true success isn't measured in dollars, but in the integrity of your work and the people you surround yourself with. Charlie stood nearby, nodding in approval. We had both been through hell, but had come out the other side with Dad's legacy intact. Later that day, I visited Dad's grave for the first time since the funeral. I brought his favorite scotch and 2 glasses. As the sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and gold, I poured us both a measure. "We did it, Dad," I said quietly. "Everything's back the way you wanted it. The company's safe. Your real legacy is secure." I took a sip, feeling the familiar burn. "I wish you were here to see it. I wish a lot of things, but mostly I want you to know that I heard you. Even when you couldn't speak, you found a way to tell me the truth." I set his glass on the headstone and watched as the last rays of sunlight caught the amber liquid, turning it to gold. In that moment I felt him there, in the gentle breeze, in the fading light, in the future he had safeguarded for me against all odds. Some might call what happened a tragedy or a cautionary tale about trust and greed, but I see it differently. To me, it's the final lesson from a father to his son, that love finds a way to speak, even when every voice tries to silence it. That the bonds we build over a lifetime can't be broken by a signature on a fraudulent document. That the truth, no matter how deeply buried, waits to be found by those who refuse to stop looking. Victoria thought she had won. She thought my father's voice had been silenced forever, but she underestimated the power of a father's love and a son's determination to honor it. In the end, it wasn't just a video that preserved my father's wishes. It was everything he had taught me about perseverance, integrity, and fighting for what's right. Dad built his company on those values. Now it's my turn to build upon his foundation, to create something even stronger, even more enduring. And every day when I walk through those doors, I know he's watching. I know he's proud. Because some legacies can't be stolen, no matter how carefully someone plots to take them away. They live on in what we build, in what we choose to protect, in how we honor those who came before us. That's the real inheritance my father left me, and it's worth more than any company ever could be. The day after my father's funeral, I returned to Bennett Construction headquarters for the first time since his diagnosis. The building itself, a renovated warehouse in Portland's Pearl District that Dad had transformed 5 years ago, felt hollow somehow. Employees offered somber nods as I walked through the open workspace. Many had tears in their eyes. Dad hadn't just been their boss, he'd been their mentor, sometimes even their friend. I paused at Janet's desk. She'd been Dad's executive assistant for over 12 years and knew the rhythm of the company better than anyone, except perhaps Charlie and me. "How are you holding up?" she asked, her eyes red-rimmed behind her glasses. "I'm functioning," I answered honestly. "Has Victoria been in?" Janet's expression tightened slightly. "Yesterday afternoon, she took some files from your father's office." Her disapproval was subtle but clear. Janet had always maintained perfect professionalism around Victoria, but I knew she shared my reservations. Did she say what she was looking for? Financial records mostly, and the company's seal. Janet lowered her voice. "Michael, something doesn't feel right." She was asking about bank account access protocols and signature authorities. An uneasy feeling settled in my stomach. "I'm going to check Dad's office." Dad's corner office remained largely as he'd left it. The awards on the wall, the model of our first major commercial project on the credenza, the worn leather chair where he'd spent countless hours reviewing blueprints. But his desk had been disturbed. The drawers weren't fully closed, and the careful organization system he maintained was disrupted. The filing cabinet beside the desk stood partially open, folders jutting out at odd angles. I was still surveying the damage when Charlie appeared in the doorway, his weathered face grave. "We need to talk," he said quietly. "Not here." We walked to a nearby coffee shop, a small independent place where Dad and I often met for early morning strategy sessions. The familiar smell of roasting beans and pastries felt jarringly normal against the unreality of the past few weeks. Victoria came to see me last night, Charlie said, once we were seated in a corner booth, far from other customers. Asked for my resignation from the board. I nearly choked on my coffee. She what? She doesn't have that authority. Charlie's expression was grim. According to her, she does. Says Robert changed his estate plan before he died. Left her controlling interest in the company. That's impossible, I said. But even as the words left my mouth, the pieces started clicking into place. The removed files, the questions about bank access, Victoria's increasing presence at the office in Dad's final weeks. I told her I wouldn't resign without seeing documentation and consulting with you, Charlie continued. She said there's a meeting with the lawyer tomorrow morning at 10. He leaned forward. Michael, whatever's happening, it's moving fast. Too fast. Did Dad ever say anything to you about changing his plans for the company? Charlie shook his head emphatically. Just the opposite. Last time we really talked, maybe 3 weeks before the end, he was worried about you. Wanted to make sure you'd have support running things after he was gone. He paused. He did mention that Victoria had been pushing him to modernize the company structure. Said she kept bringing up consultants and reorganization options. I rubbed my temples, feeling a headache building. This doesn't make sense. Dad built that company for me to take over someday. He made that clear to everyone, including Victoria, which is why we need to see exactly what this document says. Charlie's eyes narrowed, and find out how it came to exist. We spent the next hour strategizing. Charlie would attend the meeting with Victoria's lawyer the next day, while I would contact Richard Sullivan to see what he knew about any changes to Dad's estate plan. We also agreed to touch base with some of the senior employees, people who had been with Dad for years and might have insights into any unusual activity in his final weeks. By the time I returned to my apartment that evening, I felt marginally more prepared but increasingly disturbed. Everything I knew about my father contradicted the idea that he would cut me out of the company. Yet Victoria's confidence suggested she had something solid to support her claims. I poured myself a glass of Dad's favorite whiskey and sat at my kitchen counter, scrolling through recent photos on my phone. There weren't many of Dad from his final months. Victoria had severely limited visits, claiming he needed rest, but I found one from about 2 months ago. We were at the site of the new community center project, Dad looking thin but standing straight, proudly showing me the innovative truss system he'd designed for the main hall. His eyes in the photo were clear and focused. Whatever his physical condition, his mind had been sharp that day. He'd discussed future projects, advised me on handling a difficult subcontractor, even joked about the Portland Trail Blazers' playoff chances. Nothing about that day suggested a man who was planning to disinherit his only child. My phone rang, startling me from my thoughts. It was Elaine Parker, the hospice nurse who had cared for Dad in his final weeks. Michael, I hope I'm not calling too late. Her voice was hesitant. Not at all, Elaine. Is everything okay? I'm not sure. She paused. I've been debating whether to call you. It's about your father's last weeks. I sat up straighter. What about them? There were some things that didn't seem right to me, professionally speaking. She lowered her voice. Mrs. Bennett was very controlling of your father's care. She insisted on administering his medications herself, which isn't standard protocol. When I questioned this, she said it was your father's preference. Was it? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. I don't think so. Once, when she wasn't home, he asked me to check his medication, said he felt wrong after taking too foggy, too disoriented. Elaine's professional composure slipped slightly. I looked at what she'd been giving him. The dosages were concerning. When I mentioned this to Mrs. Bennett, she became very defensive, said she had adjusted the dosage under doctor's orders. Did you verify that with the doctor? I tried. Dr. Matthews never returned my calls. The next day, Mrs. Bennett informed me that they were switching to a different hospice service. Her voice hardened. I was effectively terminated. I gripped the phone tighter. When was this, Elaine? About 3 weeks before your father passed. Right around the time she started having frequent meetings with some lawyer I didn't recognize, not your family attorney. I'd met him before. Did you happen to catch the new lawyer's name? Graves, I think. Martin Graves. She paused. Michael, I don't want to overstep, but something wasn't right in that house. Your father seemed afraid sometimes, especially after Victoria would help him with his medication. And once, I overheard him on the phone when she was out. He was trying to reach you, but seemed confused about how to use his phone. He kept saying he needed to warn you about something. My blood ran cold. Did he say what? No. Victoria came home before he could make the call. She took the phone from him, told him he was too tired to talk. Elaine sighed. I should have said something sooner. I'm sorry. You're saying something now, I replied, and I appreciate it more than you know. After hanging up, I sat in stunned silence. The implications of Elaine's call were overwhelming. If Victoria had been manipulating Dad's medication, keeping him sedated and confused while bringing in a new lawyer to change his will, the scenario was too terrible to contemplate, yet it explained so much. I called Charlie immediately, relaying what I'd learned. His response was immediate and grim. We need to talk to Sullivan first thing tomorrow, and we might need to consider bringing in the police. Sleep was impossible that night. I paced my apartment, rifling through Dad's personal effects that I'd brought home after his death, a small box of photographs, his favorite watch, the fountain pen I'd given him for his 60th birthday. Nothing that offered answers to the questions now haunting me. At dawn, I drove to the cemetery where we'd buried Dad just days earlier. The morning was misty, the grass wet beneath my feet as I approached his grave. The flowers from the funeral were still fresh, arranged in elaborate displays that Dad would have hated. He'd always preferred simplicity. One reason why Victoria's ornate taste had seemed so at odds with his character. I don't know what happened, Dad, I said quietly to the granite headstone, but I promise you I'll find out, and I'll protect what you built, somehow. As I turned to leave, my phone buzzed with a text from Charlie. Sullivan agreed to meet us at 8 a.m., his office. Richard Sullivan's law office occupied the top floor of a historic building in downtown Portland. He'd been handling my family's legal affairs since before I was born, had drafted my parents' first will, had set up the company's original incorporation papers. If anyone knew Dad's true intentions, it would be him. Sullivan greeted us with solemn handshakes, his usual jovial manner subdued. I've been wanting to call you, Michael, he said, as he led us into his office. Something very strange is happening. Victoria claims Dad changed his will, I said, getting straight to the point. Left her in control of Bennett Construction. Sullivan's bushy eyebrows drew together. That directly contradicts the estate plan we finalized last year. He turned to his computer, typing rapidly. Robert was adamant about the succession plan for the company. We spent months structuring it properly, minimizing tax implications, ensuring a smooth transition to you with protections for long-term employees. He swiveled his monitor so we could see the document on screen. This is the will and business succession plan I drafted for your father. He signed it 11 months ago, with 2 of my staff as witnesses. He scrolled to the relevant section. As you can see, it clearly transfers ownership of Bennett Construction to you upon his death, with Charlie as an advisor during the transition period and provisions for profit sharing with employees who've been with the company over 10 years. Relief flooded through me, followed immediately by confusion. Then what is Victoria talking about? What document is she planning to present today? Sullivan's expression darkened. That's what concerns me. About 2 weeks ago, I received a formal notice that your father had retained new counsel for estate matters. A Martin Graves. He practically spat the name. I called your father immediately, of course, but Victoria intercepted the call, said Robert was too ill to come to the phone, but that yes, they had decided to make some updates to the estate plan with fresh eyes. Did you ever speak to Dad directly about this? Charlie asked. I tried, repeatedly. Sullivan looked pained. Every time I called, Victoria answered. Every time I went by the house, I was turned away. Robert is resting. Robert is meeting with his doctors. Robert doesn't want to be disturbed. He shook his head. The last time I tried, about 10 days before he passed, Victoria told me quite bluntly that my services were no longer required and that I should direct any further communications to Graves. You didn't think to call me? I couldn't keep the edge from my voice. Sullivan looked genuinely remorseful. I did, actually. I left messages for you twice. Victoria called back both times, said you were too overwhelmed with company matters to deal with legal issues and that she was handling everything per Robert's wishes. He sighed. I should have tried harder to reach you directly. I'm sorry, Michael. I couldn't remember receiving any messages from Sullivan, but the last weeks of Dad's illness were a blur of trying to keep the company running while desperately seeking moments with him between Victoria's carefully controlled visiting hours. So what happens now, Charlie asked, if there are two conflicting wills? If Graves produced a more recent will, signed by Robert and properly witnessed, it would technically supersede mine, Sullivan admitted. But given what you've told me about the circumstances, the medication issues, the isolation, Victoria's controlling behavior, we have grounds to challenge on the basis of undue influence and lack of testamentary capacity. Meaning what exactly? I asked. Meaning we argue that Robert wasn't of sound mind when he signed the new document and/or that he was under Victoria's coercive influence. Sullivan leaned forward. It won't be easy. We'd need evidence, medical records, witness testimony about his mental state, documentation of Victoria's controlling behavior. I have some of that already, I said, thinking of Elaine's call and the possibility of other staff who might have observed similar things. And I'm going to get more. Sullivan checked his watch. What time is the meeting with Graves? 10 o'clock. Charlie replied. I'll prepare the paperwork to contest whatever they present, Sullivan said decisively. In the meantime, don't sign anything. Don't agree to anything. Just listen and observe. He fixed me with a serious look. And Michael, be careful. If Victoria went to these lengths to secure the company, there's no telling what else she might do. We left Sullivan's office with a plan. Charlie would attend the meeting with Graves as scheduled, primarily to observe and gather information. I would begin collecting evidence, starting with contacting Elaine Parker to get a formal statement about the medication issues, then moving on to other household staff and caregivers who might have witnessed Victoria's behavior during Dad's final weeks. What about the company itself? Charlie asked as we walked to our cars. If Victoria's going to claim ownership, she might try to take immediate control. I need to secure the operations, I realized. Make sure she can't freeze accounts or lock us out of systems. Talk to Marcus in IT and Deborah in finance, Charlie advised. They're both completely loyal to you and your father. They can help create safeguards until we sort this out legally. I headed straight to Bennett Construction from Sullivan's office. The morning staff meeting would be starting soon, a tradition Dad had maintained for decades, gathering department heads each morning to coordinate the day's priorities. Victoria had never attended these meetings. She'd always dismissed them as inefficient compared to email updates. The conference room fell silent as I entered. 8 faces turned toward me, expressions ranging from sympathy to anxiety. These were Dad's core team. People who had been with the company for years, who had helped build it into what it was today. Thank you all for being here, I began, closing the door firmly. We have a situation developing that you need to be aware of." I took a deep breath. "Victoria is claiming that my father changed his will before he died, giving her ownership and control of Bennett Construction. The reactions were immediate and vocal: shock, disbelief, outrage. Marcus from IT actually stood up, his usually calm demeanor cracking. "That's impossible. Your dad would never do that." "I agree," I said, raising a hand to quiet the eruption. "And I'm fighting it. But in the meantime, we need to protect the company's operations." I turned to Deborah, our finance director. "Victoria may try to access accounts or change banking authorizations. Can we prevent that?" Deborah, methodical as always, was already taking notes. "Most of our accounts require dual authentication or board approval for significant changes, but there are a few operational accounts that had your father as the primary signatory." She looked up. "We should change those immediately to require multiple approvals." "Do it," I said. "And Marcus, I need you to secure our systems, change critical passwords, enable additional verification steps, monitor for any unusual access." "Attempts." Marcus nodded grimly. "Consider it done. No one's getting into our systems without us knowing about it." I addressed the whole group. "This is going to get complicated and possibly ugly. I want to be transparent with all of you about what's happening, but I also need your discretion. The company's stability is at stake." I paused, looking at each face around the table. "If Victoria contacts any of you directly with instructions or requests, please let me know immediately. Don't act on anything without checking with me first." Linda from HR spoke up. "Michael, should we be worried about our jobs if Victoria takes control?" It was the question I'd been dreading, but they deserved honesty. "I don't know what her long-term plans might be, but I promise you this: I'm going to fight with everything I have to honor my father's true wishes. And I know with absolute certainty that he wanted this company to stay intact, with the team he built continuing his legacy." The meeting shifted to operational matters. After that, current projects, pending bids, supply chain issues. I tried to focus, to be the leader they needed, but my mind kept returning to the image of Victoria sitting in Dad's office, planning to dismantle everything he'd built. As the meeting concluded, Deborah pulled me aside. "There's something else. You should know," she said quietly. "Yesterday, Victoria asked me for a complete valuation of the company and its assets. When I asked why, she mentioned something about exploring strategic partnership opportunities. My stomach tightened. She's looking to sell." Deborah nodded. "That would be my guess. She also wanted to know which of our projects could be completed quickly for immediate profit versus longer-term investments." "Asset stripping," I muttered. The picture was becoming clearer. Victoria didn't want to run Bennett Construction. She wanted to liquidate it for maximum short-term gain. I returned to my office to find 3 voicemails from Victoria, each more demanding than the last. The final one was explicitly threatening. "Michael, your absence from this morning's meeting with Martin was discourteous and unprofessional. We have legal documents that require your immediate attention. If you continue to avoid your responsibilities in this transition, we will be forced to take more formal measures. Call me back immediately." I deleted the messages without returning the call. On my desk, I found a stack of project files, current jobs that needed decisions or approvals. Dad and I had always shared this work. Now it fell to me alone. I forced myself to focus on them for the next hour, reviewing changes, signing off on material orders, addressing field issues. The company couldn't afford to falter while I dealt with Victoria's machinations. Around noon, Charlie arrived, his expression grim as he closed my office door behind him. "It's worse than we thought," he said without preamble. "The document Graves presented is comprehensive. New will, new trust documents, new company bylaws. Everything structured to give Victoria complete control. And Dad's signature looks genuine, though shakier than usual, dated just 2.5 weeks before he died. Charlie dropped into the chair across from my desk. 2 witnesses and a notary, all from Graves's office. Very convenient. What about the board? Dad always intended for the board to have oversight powers. The company's board of directors consisted of Charlie, me, Dad's old college friend Thomas Reynolds, and our banker Sarah Linden, all people Dad trusted implicitly. The new bylaws dissolve the current board, effective upon Robert's death, and establish a new one with Victoria as chairperson. She gets to appoint the other members. Charlie's disgust was evident. It's a complete takeover, Michael. If this document stands, she owns everything. The company, the equipment, the real estate holdings, everything. I leaned back, trying to process the magnitude of what we were facing. Sullivan says we can challenge based on Dad's mental state and Victoria's influence. He's right, but Graves is already prepared for that argument. He claims to have had multiple meetings with Robert where he demonstrated clear understanding and intention. Charlie's jaw tightened. He even said they discussed you specifically, that Robert had concerns about your readiness to lead and wanted experienced oversight during a transition period. That's absolute garbage, I said, anger finally breaking through my shock. Dad spent 15 years preparing me to take over. Everyone in this building knows that. Which is why we need those people as witnesses, Charlie replied, along with anyone who saw how Victoria isolated Robert and controlled his medication. He hesitated. But Michael, we need to be strategic here. Victoria clearly planned this carefully. If we move too slowly or too publicly, she could take actions that would be hard to reverse. Selling assets, terminating employees, even dissolving the company entirely. I nodded, resolution hardening within me. Sullivan's preparing the legal challenge. In the meantime, I've already started securing operations, but you're right, we need to move quickly. I stood up, decision made. I'm going to the house today. There might be evidence there, Dad's personal notes, the original medication prescriptions, maybe even his own records of what was happening. That's risky, Charlie warned. If Victoria catches you, she's at the lawyer's office until at least 3, I replied. I heard her tell Janet she had meetings all afternoon. This might be my only chance to search the house without her knowing. Charlie looked concerned but nodded. Be careful, and Michael, record everything you find. Take photos, notes, anything that could help prove what she did. An hour later, I pulled into the driveway of my childhood home, the sprawling craftsman-style house in Portland Heights that Dad had lovingly restored over decades. I still had my key. Victoria hadn't thought to ask for it back after the funeral. The house felt different somehow, colder, despite the warm June afternoon. Victoria had already begun redecorating, I noticed. Mom's favorite reading chair was gone from the living room, replaced by a sleek, modern sofa that looked like it belonged in a magazine spread rather than a home. I moved quickly through the main floor, heading for Dad's study at the back of the house. This had always been his sanctuary. A warm space lined with bookshelves, smelling of leather and the pipe tobacco he'd occasionally indulged in, despite Mom's gentle scolding. The room was largely untouched, though I noticed gaps in the bookshelves where certain volumes had been removed. I went straight to his desk, trying drawers that I expected to be locked. To my surprise, they slid open easily. The contents had been rifled through, folders and papers disorganized. Victoria had clearly been searching for something, probably financial documents or legal papers, but hadn't bothered to maintain Dad's meticulous organization system. In the bottom drawer, beneath a stack of old project files, I found Dad's personal journal. He'd kept one for as long as I could remember, jotting down thoughts about work, family, occasional philosophical musings. Victoria probably hadn't recognized its significance among the business papers. I flipped to the most recent entries, heart pounding, as I photographed page after page with my phone. The entries became shorter and more sporadic during his illness, but certain passages leapt out. May 3rd. V brought another lawyer today, not Richard. Said it was to update some papers. Too tired to read everything. She seems very insistent. May 7. Something wrong with new medication. Can't focus. Told the nurse, but V dismissed her concerns. Need to talk to Dr. Matthews directly. May 9. V took my phone. Says too many calls will tire me. Need to reach Michael. Something isn't right. May 12th. V and her lawyer again today. More papers. She stood over me while I signed. Couldn't read clearly. When I asked questions, she said it was all as we discussed. Don't remember discussing anything. The final entry, dated May 15th, just 10 days before he died, sent a chill through me. Must warn Michael. V not what she seems. If anything happens to me, MB, check the safe. The safe. Dad had installed a small wall safe behind his fishing trophy years ago, a secure place for important documents and valuables. Victoria might not even know it existed. Dad had always been discreet about it. I moved the trophy and spun the dial to the combination. My birthday, Mom's birthday, and their anniversary date. The mechanism clicked, and the door swung open. Inside were Mom's jewelry, some cash, and a sealed envelope with my name on it in Dad's handwriting. Heart racing, I tore it open to find a single sheet of paper and a small key. The note was brief. Michael, if you're reading this, something has gone wrong. Victoria is not who I thought. Watch the video on my private laptop. The key is for the storage unit. Love, Dad. My hands shook slightly. Dad had a personal laptop he used mainly for journaling and family photos. It was kept in his nightstand drawer. I hesitated. Going into the master bedroom felt more invasive, more risky, but I had to know what he'd left for me to find. The bedroom had been completely transformed. Gone were Dad and Mom's matching oak dressers, replaced by sleek white furniture. The walls, once a warm beige, were now stark grey. It felt like a hotel room, all traces of my parents systematically erased. Dad's nightstand remained, though, likely because Victoria hadn't yet found a replacement that suited her aesthetic. The laptop was there, plugged in and closed. I grabbed it and the charger, not wanting to risk viewing anything in the house. As I was leaving, I made a quick detour to the kitchen. The medication cabinet where Dad's prescriptions had been kept was almost empty, but 2 bottles remained. I photographed them, noting the dosages and prescribing physician. Then I did a final sweep through Dad's study, taking the journal and several folders of what appeared to be recent financial and legal documents. I was backing out of the driveway when a sleek black Mercedes turned onto the street, Victoria's car. I ducked down, heart hammering as she passed my truck without a second glance, too focused on her phone conversation to notice me. It had been a close call, too close. Back at my apartment, I set up Dad's laptop on my dining table. It was password protected, of course, but I knew my father's habits. I tried Elizabeth 1965, Mom's name and birth year, and the screen unlocked. The desktop was neatly organized with folders for family photos, company projects, and personal writing. But prominently displayed was a video file titled simply for Michael. The creation date was May 16th, the day after his last journal entry. With trembling fingers, I clicked play. Dad appeared on screen, sitting up in his bed. He looked gaunt, his once robust frame diminished by illness, but his eyes were clear and determined. He glanced toward the bedroom door before speaking in a low, urgent voice. Michael, I don't have much time. Victoria will be back soon. He drew a labored breath. I've made a terrible mistake, not just marrying her, but trusting her. The medication she's giving me, it's not right. I'm either sleeping for hours or so foggy, I can't think straight. He leaned closer to the camera. She brought a lawyer, not Richard, made me sign papers, told me they were routine updates, but I saw enough to know better. She's trying to take everything, son. The company, the house, everything I built for you. Dad's voice cracked with emotion. "I've tried to call you, but she's monitoring the phones. Fired the nurse who was helping me. I'm recording this while she's out at some lunch." He held up a small key, identical to the one I'd found in the safe. "Storage unit at Portland Secure Storage on Madison, Unit 247. I've put documents there. My real will, the original succession plan for the company, and medical records the doctor gave me directly. Get them before she does." He looked over his shoulder again, listening for something. "I don't have proof of what she's doing with the medications, but Dr. Matthews might help. He seemed concerned at my last appointment, asked questions about my symptoms that made Victoria uncomfortable." His expression softened. "Michael, I'm so sorry. I should have listened when you had concerns about her, should have seen through the act." He coughed, a painful sound that made me wince. "Whatever happens, know that I would never cut you out of your inheritance. Bennett Construction is yours, built it for you, with you. Don't let her take that away." There was a sound off camera, a car door closing. Dad's eyes widened. "She's back. Remember, storage unit, Dr. Matthews and Richard Sullivan. Trust them. Trust Charlie. I love you, son." The video ended abruptly. I sat in stunned silence, tears streaming down my face, grief and rage mingling into a cold, hard resolve. The evidence was mounting. The journal entries, the video, the suspicious medication changes, the isolation from family and friends during his final weeks. Victoria hadn't just manipulated a dying man, she'd effectively imprisoned him, controlling his medication, his communications, his legal affairs, all while systematically positioning herself to steal everything he'd spent a lifetime building. I called Charlie immediately. "I need you to meet me at Portland Secure Storage on Madison," I said without preamble. "Dad left evidence there, and we need to contact Dr. Matthews as soon as possible." Charlie's response was immediate. "I'm on my way, and Michael, bring the laptop and anything else you found. We're going straight to Sullivan after this. It's time to fight back." As I gathered the evidence and headed for my truck, a grim determination replaced my initial shock. Victoria had underestimated me, just as she had underestimated my father. She thought she'd eliminated all traces of his true intentions, controlled every variable, secured her ill-gotten gains. But she didn't understand what Dad had taught me from the beginning, that a company built on relationships and integrity couldn't be stolen through legal trickery, that the truth has a way of emerging, even when every effort is made to suppress it, and that some bonds, like that between a father and son who built something meaningful together, can't be broken by fraud or deceit. The real battle was just beginning, but for the first time since Dad's death, I felt him with me, guiding my next steps. I wasn't fighting just for my inheritance or for control of the company. I was fighting for his legacy, his reputation, and the truth of who he really was. And that was a fight I refused to lose. The storage facility was tucked away in an industrial area of southeast Portland, a sprawling complex of identical orange doors arranged in neat rows behind a chain-link fence. I arrived before Charlie, pacing impatiently by my truck until I spotted his sedan pulling into the parking lot. "Did you bring the key?" he asked as he approached, his breath visible in the cool evening air. I held up the small silver key from Dad's safe. "Unit 247. We made our way through the maze of storage units, our footsteps echoing in the concrete corridors. The fluorescent lighting cast harsh shadows, giving everything an institutional feel that matched my grim mood. When we reached Unit 247, I hesitated for just a moment before sliding the key into the padlock. The lock clicked open easily, recently used, not rusted or stiff. Inside, the unit was small and nearly empty, except for a single metal file box in the center of the concrete floor. Dad had always been methodical, focused. Even in his desperate final days, he'd known exactly what needed to be preserved. I knelt and opened the box. Inside were several manila folders, neatly labeled in Dad's precise handwriting: original will, company succession, medical records, and Victoria, evidence. A chill ran through me at that last one. Even dying, even medicated, Dad had been collecting evidence. He knew, Charlie said quietly, looking over my shoulder. He knew what she was doing. But he couldn't stop it, I replied, the weight of his isolation and helplessness hitting me anew. How terrifying it must have been for him to realize he was being manipulated, but be unable to reach anyone who could help. We decided against reviewing the documents in the dimly lit storage unit. Instead, we carefully packed the file box and headed directly to Sullivan's office. He was waiting for us despite the late hour, his lined face grave as we explained what we'd found. "Let's see what Robert managed to save," he said, clearing space on his conference table as I unpacked the file box. The original will folder contained exactly what we expected: the properly executed will and trust documents that Sullivan had prepared, leaving Bennett Construction to me with provisions for long-term employees. But the company succession folder held something additional: a detailed transition plan in Dad's handwriting, outlining his vision for the company's future under my leadership. It included notes about potential expansion opportunities, employees with leadership potential, and even personal advice about maintaining the company culture he'd built. The document was dated just 2 months before his diagnosis, evidence of his clear intentions before Victoria entered the picture. The medical records folder contained prescription information, visit summaries, and most importantly, notes from Dr. Matthews expressing concern about unusual symptom patterns inconsistent with disease progression and possible medication mismanagement. There was also a copy of a request for a home health assessment that had apparently never been completed, likely intercepted by Victoria. But it was the Victoria evidence folder that truly shook me. Inside were bank statements showing large transfers from Victoria's personal account to an offshore entity in the weeks after Dad's diagnosis. There were also screenshots of text messages between Victoria and someone named Alec discussing the plan and how to handle the son. Most chilling was a printed email from Victoria to Graves outlining exactly what the new will should contain, dated a full week before she claimed Dad had decided to make changes. "This is substantial," Sullivan said, his usual measured tone tinged with anger as he reviewed the documents. "The bank records and communications alone suggest premeditation and conspiracy. Combined with the medical evidence and Robert's own testimony via the video," he looked up at me, determination in his eyes. "We have a case, Michael, a strong one." "So what's our next step?" Charlie asked. Sullivan sorted the documents into precise piles. "First, we file an emergency petition with the probate court, challenging the fraudulent will and requesting a freezing order on all assets. That needs to happen first thing tomorrow." He tapped the medical records. "Second, we contact Dr. Matthews to obtain a formal statement about his concerns regarding Robert's treatment." "And Victoria?" I asked, unable to keep the edge from my voice. "For now, we don't confront her directly," Sullivan advised. "The element of surprise works in our favor. Once the court filings are public, she'll know we're challenging. But by then, the freezing order should be in place to prevent her from liquidating assets or making major company changes." I nodded, thinking of the company and its employees, people whose livelihoods depended on us resolving this quickly. What about Bennett Construction in the meantime? She's already claiming ownership. Has she taken any formal steps at the company yet? Tried to access accounts, change locks, terminate employees? She's been asking questions, collecting information. But no, nothing drastic yet. Good. Sullivan looked thoughtful. My recommendation is to continue business as usual as much as possible. You're the designated successor in all the original documentation. The employees know that. Until a court says otherwise, act according to your father's known wishes. As Charlie and I left Sullivan's office, the weight of responsibility felt both heavier and somehow more manageable. We had evidence. We had a plan. The path forward would be difficult, but no longer seemed impossible. You should get some rest, Charlie said as we reached our cars. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. I nodded, though I doubted sleep would come easily. Thanks, Charlie, for everything. Your father was my best friend for 30 years, he replied simply. I'll see this through with you to the end. The next morning began with an urgent call from Janet at the office. Michael, you need to get here right away, she said, her voice tense. Victoria's here with some man she's introducing as the new interim CEO. I'm on my way, I said, already reaching for my keys. Don't let them change anything. No account access, no system passwords, nothing. I called Charlie from the car, updating him on the situation. Sullivan filed the emergency petition when the court opened at 8, he told me, but it will take time for the judge to review and issue orders. We don't have time, I replied, pushing the speed limit as I headed downtown. She's making her move now. When I arrived at Bennett Construction, the tension in the office was palpable. Employees stood in small groups, whispering anxiously. Victoria had commandeered the main conference room, visible through the glass walls, as she gestured emphatically to a man in an expensive suit I'd never seen before. Marcus from IT intercepted me before I could head toward them. She's trying to get admin access to all our systems, he muttered. Says she needs to assess current project status. I told her it requires board approval, but she's insisting she is the board now. You did the right thing, I assured him. Has she shown anyone documentation of her supposed authority? Just waves around some legal papers, but no one's actually read them, Marcus replied. Most of the team is stalling, saying they need proper authorization from you or Charlie. I squared my shoulders, prepared for the confrontation that could no longer be avoided. As I approached the conference room, I could see Victoria's expression shift from confident to wary. She whispered something to the suit beside her, who straightened his tie in a gesture of preparing for battle. I pushed open the glass door without knocking. Good morning, Victoria. I understand you're introducing someone as the new CEO. Victoria's smile was brittle. Michael, yes. This is Alexander Westfield from Pinnacle Management. He'll be overseeing daily operations during the transition period. She gestured to the documents spread across the table. As I've been explaining to your staff, there have been some changes to the company structure following your father's passing. Interesting, I replied, maintaining a calm I didn't feel. Because I've just come from our family attorney, who has no record of any authorized leadership changes. I turned to Westfield. Mr. Westfield, I should inform you that there are serious legal questions about any documents Mrs. Bennett may have shown you. The matter is before the courts as we speak. Westfield's expression faltered slightly as he glanced at Victoria. I was assured everything was in order. It is in order, Victoria snapped, her composure cracking. I have the legal documents right here. Your father signed them himself. Under duress and heavy medication, I replied evenly, while being isolated from his family and advisors, all of which is now documented and before the court. Victoria's eyes narrowed. You're making serious accusations, Michael. Accusations that could damage your own reputation as much as mine if proven false. I agree. They are serious. That's why I've been careful to gather substantial evidence before making you them. I placed my briefcase on the table and withdrew a copy of the petition Sullivan had filed that morning. This emergency petition details everything. The medication manipulation, the isolation, the coordination between you and your lawyer to create fraudulent documents. I turned to Westfield again. Mr. Westfield, this situation is more complicated than you've been led to believe. I'd suggest you consult with your own legal counsel before taking any actions that might make you party to fraud." He was already gathering his things, clearly uncomfortable. "I think that would be prudent. Mrs. Bennett, perhaps we should postpone our discussions until these legal matters are clarified." Victoria's face flushed with anger. "This is ridiculous! You can't possibly believe—" "We have the video, Victoria," I interrupted quietly. She froze. "What video?" "The one Dad recorded when you thought he was resting. The one where he explains exactly what you were doing with his medication, with the lawyers, with the isolation." I held her gaze steadily. "We have his journal too, and the evidence he collected and hid where you couldn't find it." The color drained from her face. For the first time since I'd known her, Victoria appeared genuinely shaken. Her carefully constructed facade was crumbling, and beneath it I could see something ugly and desperate. "This isn't over," she hissed, gathering her papers with trembling hands. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." "Actually, I think I do now," I replied. "And I think my father finally did too, right before he died." She stalked out, Westfield trailing awkwardly behind her. As soon as they were gone, I released a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The confrontation had gone better than expected, but I had no illusions that Victoria would simply give up. I spent the next hour reassuring the staff, explaining, in broad terms, that there was a legal dispute about my father's last wishes, but that we were working to resolve it. Most seemed relieved. They'd known and trusted Dad for years, had watched me grow up in the business. Victoria had been an outsider who'd never bothered to build relationships with them. Charlie arrived mid-morning with an update from Sullivan. "The judge reviewed our petition and has scheduled an emergency hearing for tomorrow morning," he reported. "In the meantime, he's issued a temporary restraining order preventing Victoria from taking any actions regarding company assets or management." "That's good news," I said. "But she was already here trying to install her own CEO. I don't think a court order is going to stop her from trying again." Sullivan suggested we hire security, at least for the office and main construction sites, just until this is resolved. Charlie handed me a business card. "He recommends these folks, former police officers, very professional." I nodded, the reality of our situation sinking in. We were effectively at war with Victoria, and the company was the battlefield. "Let's do it, and let's change the locks today, too." By afternoon, we had security personnel stationed at the office entrance and at our 3 active construction sites. The IT team had implemented additional security protocols for all digital systems, and the accounting department had placed holds, requiring multiple approvals on all significant financial transactions. As I was reviewing project timelines with our site managers, ensuring that the legal battle wouldn't disrupt our client's work, Janet appeared at my office door. "Michael, there's a Dr. Matthews here to see you. Says it's important." Dr. Christopher Matthews was younger than I'd expected, mid-40s perhaps, with a serious demeanor enhanced by wire-rimmed glasses. He closed my office door carefully before speaking. "I came as soon as I heard from Mr. Sullivan about the court filing," he said, taking the seat I offered. "I've been concerned about your father's situation for some time." "Thank you for coming," I replied. "Anything you can tell us would be helpful." Matthews leaned forward, hands clasped. "I was your father's oncologist from initial diagnosis. The disease was advanced, yes, but his mental faculties remained sharp throughout early treatment. He was always engaged, asking questions, making decisions about his care." He frowned. "That changed about 2 months before his death. When he came in for appointments, he was increasingly sedated, sometimes barely able to communicate. His wife attributed it to disease progression, but the pattern didn't match typical presentations." You suspected something was wrong?" Matthews nodded grimly. "I altered his medication regimen twice, reducing dosages, but at subsequent visits, he'd show the same sedation patterns. When I asked to speak with him privately, Mrs. Bennett refused, saying he became anxious when she wasn't present. His expression hardened. That's a red flag in potential elder abuse cases. My throat tightened at the clinical terminology. Elder abuse. It made the situation both more real and more horrific. What did you do? I requested a home health evaluation and tried to contact your father directly between appointments. Matthews looked genuinely pained. Mrs. Bennett intercepted both attempts. She then requested that all communication go through her, citing your father's fragile condition. When I persisted, she threatened to transfer his care to another oncologist. Did she follow through on that threat? No. I suspect she realized a transfer would raise questions. He adjusted his glasses. But she did bring another physician to one appointment, a Dr. Reynolds, who she introduced as a consulting palliative care specialist. He supported all her assertions about your father's condition without conducting any independent examination. It was irregular, to say the least. Do you know this Dr. Reynolds? I made inquiries, Matthews replied carefully. He has a history of disciplinary actions for prescription irregularities and has been paid as an expert witness in several estate cases involving competency questions. He paused. I've already provided Mr. Sullivan with my complete notes and observations. I'm also prepared to testify if needed. Thank you, I said sincerely. That could make a significant difference. After Dr. Matthews left, I called Sullivan to update him on the security measures we'd implemented and Victoria's earlier attempt to install a new CEO. The temporary restraining order should prevent further direct interference, Sullivan said. But I wouldn't put anything past her at this point. The hearing tomorrow is crucial. Dr. Matthews contacted me. His testimony substantially strengthens our case. What should I expect at the hearing? I asked. It will be limited in scope, focused specifically on whether there's sufficient evidence to maintain the asset freeze and continue blocking Victoria's control while the full case proceeds. The judge will hear brief arguments from both sides and review key documentation. Sullivan's tone was measured but confident. We have compelling evidence, Michael. The video testimony alone is powerful. I ended the call feeling cautiously optimistic, but knew better than to underestimate Victoria. My instincts were proven right when, an hour later, Marcus burst into my office without knocking. Someone's trying to access our project servers remotely, he reported, tablet in hand, using executive credentials. Victoria? Can't tell for sure, but the access attempts are coming from an IP address associated with Graves' law firm. Marcus showed me the security log on his tablet. They've tried 3 different password combinations for your father's account. Can you block the attempts? Already have, he confirmed, but they're getting more sophisticated. Last attempt was using a password reset protocol that would normally send a verification code to the registered email, which would be Dad's email that Victoria now controls, I realized. Marcus nodded. I've taken his email offline completely for now and implemented additional authentication requirements. But they're determined. Keep monitoring, I instructed, and document everything. This violates the restraining order. It's evidence we can use tomorrow. As evening approached, I received an unexpected visitor at the office. Thomas Reynolds, my father's college friend and a board member, appeared looking troubled. Michael, I just got the strangest call from Victoria, he said once we were seated in my office. She's offering to settle this dispute by buying out your interest in the company. A flat $3 million if you drop all claims and walk away. I couldn't help the bitter laugh that escaped me. Bennett Construction is worth at least 5 times that. I know, Reynolds replied, but she seems to think you might be tempted by immediate cash rather than a protracted legal battle. He studied me carefully. I told her I'd pass along the offer, but I also told her I thought you'd refuse. You were right, I confirmed, but the fact that she's offering a settlement suggests she's worried about tomorrow's hearing. Reynolds nodded thoughtfully. Robert would be proud of how you're handling this, son. Not everyone would have the backbone to fight someone like Victoria. After Reynolds left, I remained at the office, reviewing documents for the hearing and coordinating with the security team. Around 9, Charlie called with a new development. Sullivan just heard from a paralegal who used to work for Graves, he reported. She quit 2 weeks ago and reached out after seeing our court filing. Says she has information about how the new will was created. That could be crucial, I said, straightening in my chair. What does she know? She claims Victoria provided specific instructions about what the will should contain before Graves ever met with your father. Says there was a whole series of meetings where Victoria dictated terms, and the documents were prepared in advance. Charlie's voice hardened. The paralegal also says your father only came to the office once, appeared heavily medicated, and that Victoria guided his hand to sign in multiple places. Will she testify to this? She's willing to provide a sworn statement, Charlie confirmed. Sullivan's meeting with her now to document everything properly for tomorrow. By the time I finally left the office shortly before midnight, Bennett Construction's immediate security was as robust as we could make it on short notice. The building was locked down with new access codes, security personnel were in place, and IT safeguards had been implemented across our systems. As I drove home, exhaustion competed with a growing sense of purpose. The evidence against Victoria was mounting, each new revelation confirming what I'd suspected from the beginning, that my father's apparent betrayal had been engineered through deception and likely criminal means. Tomorrow's hearing would be just the first step in what might be a lengthy legal process, but for the first time since Dad's death, I felt we had a fighting chance to preserve his true legacy. Victoria had underestimated both of us, my father's foresight in securing evidence and my determination to uncover the truth. The apartment was dark when I arrived, but I didn't immediately turn on the lights. Instead, I stood for a moment, in the stillness, thinking about everything that had happened. In just 48 hours, I'd gone from believing my father had inexplicably betrayed me to understanding he'd fought until the end to protect what he'd built for me to inherit. I'm fighting for you now, Dad, I said aloud to the empty room, and I won't stop until this is made right. As if in answer, my phone chimed with a text from Sullivan. Paralegal's statement obtained, devastating to Victoria's case. Be at 2. Court 8:30 a.m. sharp. This judge doesn't tolerate lateness. I smiled grimly as I texted back my acknowledgement. Victoria had no idea what was coming for her tomorrow. The facade she'd constructed so carefully was about to crumble, and I would be there to watch it happen, for Dad, for myself, and for everyone else who had trusted in his vision for Bennett. Construction's future. The courthouse stood imposing against the grey Portland morning, rain falling steadily as I pulled into the parking structure. I'd barely slept, spending most of the night reviewing documents and preparing mentally for what was to come. In my briefcase were copies of everything we'd found. Dad's video, his journal, the medical records, Victoria's incriminating communications. The weight of it felt almost physical, a burden of evidence that would finally expose the truth. Charlie was waiting under the covered entrance, his weathered face serious beneath an umbrella. Beside him stood Sullivan, impeccable in a charcoal suit despite the early hour. They both nodded as I approached, a silent acknowledgement of the gravity of what we were about to do. The paralegal statement has been entered into evidence, Sullivan said without preamble as we walked through security. Judge Keller has already reviewed it along with our initial filing. How's it looking? I asked, trying to gauge our position from his expression. Cautiously optimistic, Sullivan replied, his usual measured response. Keller has a reputation for being thorough and fair. She doesn't tolerate deception in her courtroom. The courtroom was on the third floor, a wood-paneled space that smelled of furniture polish and damp wool. Victoria was already there with Martin Graves, their heads bent together in urgent conference. She looked up as we entered, her expression flickering briefly with something that might have been anxiety before, settling back into practiced confidence. I took my seat beside Sullivan at the plaintiff's table, forcing myself to look straight ahead rather than at Victoria. Charlie sat directly behind us in the first row, a solid presence that steadied my nerves. At precisely 9 a.m., a bailiff called the court to order, and Judge Keller entered, a tall woman with silver hair cut in a precise bob, her black robes crisp and authoritative. She settled behind the bench and surveyed the room with shrewd eyes that suggested very little. Escaped her notice. We're here on petition number 247362, Bennett v. Bennett, an emergency motion concerning probate matters and allegations of undue influence, she began, glancing through the papers before her. I've reviewed the initial filings from both parties, including the supplementary evidence submitted last night. Her gaze shifted between Victoria's table and ours. This is a preliminary hearing to determine if the temporary restraining order should remain in place, pending full review of the case. I'll hear brief arguments from both sides. Sullivan rose smoothly. Your Honor, we've presented substantial evidence that Robert Bennett's apparent change to his estate plan occurred under deeply troubling circumstances. The video testimony from Mr. Bennett himself, recorded shortly before his death, explicitly states that he was being medicated against his will and coerced into signing documents he wasn't permitted to read fully. He gestured toward our evidence binders. We've provided corroborating evidence from Mr. Bennett's personal physician, expressing concern about inappropriate medication levels. We have journal entries in Mr. Bennett's own hand describing his growing awareness of the situation. And perhaps, most damning, we now have sworn testimony from a former employee of Mr. Graves' firm detailing how the new will was prepared at Mrs. Bennett's instruction before Mr. Bennett ever visited the office. Judge Keller turned to Graves. Counselor, Graves stood adjusting his tie. Your Honor, we categorically deny these inflammatory allegations. Robert Bennett was of sound mind when he decided to update his estate plan. Yes, he was ill, but being ill does not render one incapable of making decisions. He attempted a sympathetic smile that didn't reach his eyes. While we sympathize with Michael Bennett's disappointment in his father's decisions, that disappointment doesn't justify these baseless accusations against Mrs. Bennett, who was simply carrying out her husband's wishes during an extremely difficult time. Judge Keller's expression revealed nothing as she made notes. Mr. Sullivan, do you wish to present witnesses today? Yes, Your Honor. We have Dr. Christopher Matthews, Mr. Bennett's oncologist, available to testify regarding his observations of Mr. Bennett's condition and the irregularities in his care. The judge nodded. Very well, call your witness. Dr. Matthews took the stand, looking considerably more formal than he had in my office the previous day. After being sworn in, he provided his credentials and explained his role in Dad's care. Sullivan led him through a series of questions about Dad's mental state throughout his illness, focusing particularly on the final months. Matthews was direct and clinical in his responses, which only made them more powerful. In your professional opinion, Dr. Matthews, was Robert Bennett capable of understanding complex legal documents during the last month of his life? Matthews didn't hesitate. On the days when I saw him, absolutely not. He was experiencing what we call medication-induced cognitive impairment. His responses were delayed, his attention span severely limited. He had difficulty tracking conversations or remembering information presented just minutes earlier. "And did this pattern of impairment concern you?" "Greatly," Matthews confirmed. "It didn't align with the expected progression of his disease. When I adjusted his pain medication dosages downward, he would return to the next appointment with the same level of sedation, suggesting someone was not following the prescribed regimen." Sullivan nodded. "When you attempted to address these concerns, what happened?" "Mrs. Bennett intercepted my communications, prevented me from speaking with Mr. Bennett privately, and threatened to change doctors when I persisted." Matthew's professional demeanor cracked slightly, revealing genuine distress. "I even filed a report with Adult Protective Services, but by the time they processed it, Mr. Bennett had passed away." When it was Graves' turn to cross-examine, he attempted to undermine Matthew's observations by suggesting the doctor had limited contact with Dad and couldn't know what his mental state was on other days. Matthews remained unshaken. "I saw Robert Bennett weekly for 5 months. I conducted cognitive assessments at each visit as part of standard protocol for patients on pain management regimens. The decline in his cognitive function did not follow the expected pattern for his condition." He looked directly at Victoria as he added, "And I was not the only one who noticed. 2 nurses documented similar concerns in his chart." After Matthews stepped down, Sullivan requested permission to play Dad's video testimony. Judge Keller agreed, and the courtroom lights dimmed slightly as a screen was set up. Watching the video again was no easier the second time. Dad's gaunt face, his labored breathing, the desperate urgency in his voice as he explained what was happening, it all hit me with fresh force. I was aware of the courtroom's complete silence as he spoke, every person transfixed by his words. "She's trying to take everything, son. The company, the house, everything I built for you." I couldn't look at Victoria during the playback, but I heard what might have been a sharp intake of breath when Dad mentioned the storage unit and the evidence he'd hidden there. When the video ended, the silence lingered for several long seconds before Judge Keller spoke. "Mr. Graves, does the defense wish to present witnesses at this time?" Graves seemed momentarily at a loss, clearly rattled by the video's impact. We would like to call Mrs. Victoria Bennett." Victoria took the stand with practiced grace, arranging her features into an expression of dignified grief. After being sworn in, she began building her narrative. "Robert and I had many conversations about his wishes for the future," she said, her voice catching slightly in what I recognized as calculated emotion. "As his condition worsened, he became increasingly concerned about the company's direction under Michael's leadership." "Could you elaborate on those concerns?" Graves prompted. Victoria nodded solemnly. "Robert felt that Michael, while talented, lacked the necessary experience to navigate the challenges facing the construction industry. He worried that the company might struggle or fail completely without more experienced oversight." She dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. "It broke his heart to make these changes, but he felt they were necessary to protect his legacy and the livelihoods of his employees." Graves guided her through a series of questions about Dad's mental state, which she insisted had remained clear until very near the end. She painted herself as the devoted caretaker, following Dad's wishes while fending off my supposed attempts to interfere with his care. "Robert specifically asked for privacy during this difficult time," she claimed. "He didn't want Michael to see him in his weakened state. It was a matter of dignity for him." When Sullivan rose for cross-examination, his approach was methodical and devastating. "Mrs. Bennett, when did you first meet Robert?" She seemed surprised by the basic question. "About 3 years ago at a charity function." "And when did your relationship become romantic?" "Approximately 2 years ago," Sullivan nodded, consulting his notes. So you knew Robert for less than 3 years total, correct? And were married to him for 14 months, she admitted. 14 months, Sullivan repeated. Yet you claim to understand his wishes for the company he built over 35 years better than his son, who worked alongside him for over a decade. Victoria's smile tightened. Robert confided in me as his wife. Sullivan changed tack. Let's discuss the video we just watched. How do you explain Robert's statements about being medicated against his will? He was confused, Victoria replied smoothly. The cancer had spread to his brain by then. He would have periods of paranoia and confusion. Interesting, Sullivan said, because we have Dr. Matthews' testimony that brain metastasis was specifically ruled out by MRI just 2 weeks before this video was recorded. He approached the witness stand with a document. In fact, we have Robert's complete medical records here, with no indication of any brain involvement. Victoria's composure wavered slightly. I'm not a doctor. I only know he sometimes seemed confused. Let's move on to the storage unit mentioned in the video, Sullivan continued. Were you aware of its existence? No, she said too quickly. Sullivan raised an eyebrow. Really? Because we have security footage from Portland Secure Storage showing you attempting to access Unit 247 just 3 days after Robert's death. The same unit where he hid the evidence we've presented today. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Victoria's face paled visibly. I may have known about it, she conceded. Robert mentioned it once. I thought it might contain personal items I should retrieve. Yet you never mentioned this storage unit during the initial probate discussions, Sullivan pointed out. Even when asked specifically about any additional property or storage facilities. Victoria had no response to that. Sullivan's next question hit even harder. Mrs. Bennett, are you acquainted with Alexander Westfield? She blinked rapidly. I may have met him at some point. Let me refresh your memory, Sullivan said, presenting another document. Alexander Westfield is the CEO of Pinnacle Management, a company that specializes in, how do they phrase it? Extracting maximum value from distressed or transitioning businesses. You attempted to install him as interim CEO at Bennett Construction yesterday, in violation of the temporary restraining order. That was before I knew about the order, Victoria protested. Was it also before you knew about the order that you attempted to remotely access Bennett Construction's secure servers from Mr. Graves' office yesterday afternoon? Sullivan asked, producing the security logs Marcus had documented. By now, Victoria's carefully constructed facade was crumbling. I needed to review company records to prepare for this hearing, she attempted. One final question, Mrs. Bennett, Sullivan said. How do you explain these text messages between you and Alexander Westfield, dated 3 weeks before Robert's death, discussing how quickly Bennett Construction's assets could be liquidated? The courtroom fell completely silent as Sullivan presented printouts of the messages obtained from the flash drive Dad had hidden. Victoria looked desperately toward Graves, who stood and objected. Your Honor, we haven't had an opportunity to review or authenticate these alleged messages. They were included in our supplementary filing last night, Counsel, Sullivan replied mildly, along with the technical verification of their origin from Robert Bennett's recovered devices. Judge Keller studied the exchange with narrowed eyes. I'll allow the question. The witness will answer. Victoria seemed to shrink in the witness chair. Those messages are being taken out of context, she insisted, but her voice lacked conviction. What possible context would justify discussing the liquidation of your dying husband's company weeks before his death? Sullivan pressed. I want to confer with my attorney, Victoria said, visibly flustered. You're under oath, Mrs. Bennett. Judge Keller reminded her sternly, please answer the question. After a long pause, Victoria managed only, I was exploring contingency options for the company's benefit. Sullivan looked directly at the judge. "No further questions, Your Honor." During a brief recess that followed, Charlie clapped a hand on my shoulder. "She's done. Did you see the judge's face when those text messages came up?" I nodded, feeling a complex mix of emotions: vindication, relief, lingering grief for Dad, and a strange hollowness where my anger at Victoria had burned so intensely. "Let's see what happens when we reconvene." When court resumed, "Judge Keller didn't keep us waiting. Based on the evidence presented, I find compelling reason to believe that the will and related documents dated May 12th may have been executed under conditions of undue influence and questionable capacity." She looked directly at Victoria. "The temporary restraining order will remain in place, prohibiting Mrs. Bennett from taking any actions regarding Bennett Construction or any other assets of the estate, pending full resolution of this matter." She wasn't finished. Furthermore, given the serious nature of the evidence presented regarding potential elder abuse, medication tampering, and fraudulent document creation, I am referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for possible criminal investigation. Her gaze hardened. "And I am freezing all assets currently in Mrs. Bennett's name or transferred to her since the beginning of Robert Bennett's illness to prevent any further dissipation of the estate." Victoria gasped audibly. Graves leaned over to whisper urgently in her ear. "Mrs. Bennett is also ordered to vacate the Bennett family home within 48 hours, the judge continued. "She may remove only her personal clothing and items she owned prior to the marriage. Everything else is to remain untouched, pending final probate determination." The judge turned to me. "Mr. Bennett, the court is appointing you as interim executor of your father's estate, with authority to manage Bennett Construction according to normal business operations. You are not, however, authorized to make extraordinary changes or dispositions until final probate is complete." She glanced at both parties. "Are there any questions about these orders?" Both attorneys indicated there were none. "Then we're adjourned. The full probate hearing will be scheduled within 30 days. As we gathered our materials, I watched Victoria in heated conversation with Graves, her gestures becoming increasingly agitated as he appeared to be delivering unwelcome advice. The composed, calculating woman who had so thoroughly deceived my father was unraveling before my eyes. Outside the courtroom, Sullivan was measured but pleased. "This is the best outcome we could have hoped for at this stage," he said. "The judge clearly found our evidence compelling." "What happens now?" I asked. "Now we prepare for the full probate hearing, though after today's revelations, I wouldn't be surprised if Victoria's side approaches us about a settlement." Sullivan checked his watch. "I need to finalize the written orders for the judge to sign. You two should head back to the company and update the team." Charlie and I walked through the rain to the parking garage, both quiet as we processed the morning's events. Finally, Charlie spoke. "Your dad would be proud, Michael. You fought for his true legacy, just like he tried to do in those final days. I just wish—" I trailed off, unsure how to articulate the complex tangle of feelings. I wished Dad hadn't suffered alone. Wished I'd seen through Victoria sooner. Wished we'd had more time. Charlie seemed to understand. "I know, me too." Back at Bennett Construction, the atmosphere had transformed. Word of the court's decision had somehow preceded us, and as we walked through the office, I was met with relieved smiles and supportive nods. Janet had ordered lunch for the entire staff, a small celebration of this first victory. I gathered everyone in the main conference room, standing at the head of the table where Dad had led countless meetings over the years. "First, thank you, all for your patience and loyalty during this difficult time," I began. "The court has recognized that my father's true wishes were for Bennett Construction to continue as he built it, with the team he valued so highly. I explained the judge's rulings in simple terms, emphasizing that while the legal process wasn't over, the immediate threat to the company had been neutralized. We can get back to doing what we do best, building quality projects that make a difference in this community. That's what Dad would want. As the meeting broke up, Marcus approached with an update. We've changed all security protocols, as you requested, and I've backed up the server evidence of yesterday's hack attempts in 3 separate locations. He grinned. Nobody's getting into our systems without an act of God or my personal permission. Good work, I told him, and pass my thanks to the whole IT team. The afternoon passed in a flurry of activity, catching up on project decisions that had been delayed by the crisis, speaking with key clients to reassure them about the company's stability, and coordinating with the security team about continued protection for our sites and personnel. Around 4 o'clock, Sullivan called with an unexpected update. The district attorney's office didn't waste any time. They've already assigned an investigator to review our evidence. They're particularly interested in the medication issues and potential financial exploitation. That was fast, I remarked. Elder abuse cases get priority, Sullivan explained, especially when the evidence is as substantial as what we've presented. They've also placed a hold on Victoria's passport at the DA's request. Apparently, they had concerns she might be a flight risk. After hanging up, I sat quietly in Dad's office, my office now, I supposed, though it didn't yet feel that way. On the wall hung the first blueprint Dad had ever drawn himself, for a small medical office that had launched the commercial side of our business. Beside it was a photo of Dad and me at the ribbon cutting for the Portland Children's Center, our largest charitable project. I was studying these mementos when Charlie appeared in the doorway. "You doing okay?" he asked. "Getting there," I replied honestly. "It still doesn't feel real, any of it. The hearing, Victoria's deception, Dad being gone." Charlie nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Grief is complicated enough without all this added trauma. Be patient with yourself. I keep thinking about what happens after the legal battles are done," I admitted. "Running this company without him, making decisions he would have made." "You won't be doing it alone," Charlie said firmly. "This team, we're all part of Robert's legacy too. We'll help you carry it forward." We were interrupted by Janet's voice on the intercom. "Michael, there's a Detective Rivera here from the district attorney's office. Says he'd like to ask you some questions about the case." I exchanged glances with Charlie. "Send him in." Detective Rivera was a compact man, with watchful eyes and a methodical manner. He explained that he'd been assigned to investigate the potential criminal aspects of Victoria's actions. "The DA takes elder abuse cases very seriously," he said, echoing Sullivan's earlier comment, "especially when they involve financial exploitation and potential medication tampering." For the next hour, I walked him through everything we'd discovered, providing copies of all our evidence. Rivera took meticulous notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions about timelines or specific details. "What kind of charges might Victoria face?" I asked as our discussion concluded. "Based on what I've seen today, potentially quite serious ones," Rivera replied. "Elder abuse, financial exploitation, fraud, possibly even charges related to improper administration of controlled substances. The DA will make the final determination, but—" He closed his notebook. "I've handled many elder abuse cases, Mr. Bennett. Few have had evidence this compelling." After Rivera left, I found myself alone again, watching the rain against the windows as evening descended. The day's events had been exhausting but validating. Judge Keller had seen through Victoria's deception. The DA's office was taking the case seriously. Bennett Construction was safe, at least for now. Yet beneath the professional victory lay the personal grief I'd had little time to process. Dad was still gone, His final weeks had still been filled with fear and isolation instead of the dignity and peace he deserved. No court ruling could change that reality. I was startled from these thoughts by my phone ringing, a number I didn't recognize. "Michael Bennett," I answered. "Mr. Bennett, this is Officer Daniels with the Portland Police Bureau. We're currently at your father's residence with Mrs. Victoria Bennett, who is removing items from the property." I tensed immediately. The court order allows her to take only her personal clothing and belongings from before the marriage. "Yes, sir, we're aware of the court order. That's why I'm calling. She's attempting to remove artwork, electronics, and jewelry that appear to predate her relationship with your father. When we questioned this, she became uncooperative. We thought you might want to be present to help identify what items are appropriately hers." "I'll be there in 20 minutes, I said, already reaching for my keys. When I arrived at the house, 2 police cruisers were parked in the driveway. Victoria's Mercedes was loaded with boxes, its trunk and back seat filled to capacity. An officer met me at the front door. "She's inside with my partner," he explained. "There's been a disagreement about several items." In the living room, Victoria stood with arms crossed, glaring at a young female officer who was calmly explaining something about the court order. Victoria's normally perfect appearance was disheveled, her hair loosened and her expensive blouse wrinkled. She turned. As I entered, her expression hardening. "Of course you called him," she spat at the officers. "You're all taking his side." "Ma'am, we're not taking sides," the female officer replied evenly. "We're enforcing a court order. Mr. Bennett can help identify items that belong to his father before your marriage." For the next hour, we went through a tense process of identifying disputed items. Victoria had attempted to claim Mum's jewelry collection, Dad's antique watch collection, and several valuable paintings that had been in the family for years. Each time I identified something as a pre-existing family item, her protests grew more strident. "This is theft," she insisted, as I reclaimed Mum's pearl necklace from a box headed for her car. "Robert wanted me to have these things." "The court disagrees," I replied simply, maintaining a calm I didn't entirely feel. By the time we finished, Victoria's collection of permitted items had shrunk considerably. The officers supervised as she loaded the remaining boxes into her car. Before leaving, she turned to me with cold fury in her eyes. "This isn't over, Michael, not by a long shot." I watched her drive away, wondering if she truly believed she could still win after all the evidence that had been revealed. Somehow, I suspected she did. People like Victoria rarely accepted defeat, even when facing overwhelming odds. Inside the house, I moved slowly through rooms that felt both familiar and strange. Victoria's decorating touches were everywhere. New furniture, different paint colors, Mom's garden paintings replaced with abstract pieces. Yet beneath these superficial changes, the bones of our family home remained. In Dad's study, I found one of the few spaces relatively untouched by Victoria's influence. His books still lined the shelves. His worn leather chair still faced the window overlooking the garden. I sat there for a long while, trying to feel his presence, to connect with the man who had fought so hard to preserve his legacy in those final, difficult days. "We're getting there, Dad," I said softly to the empty room. "Victoria's being held accountable. The company is safe. I'm going to make sure everything you built continues exactly as you wanted." As I finally rose to leave, my phone chimed with a text from Sullivan. "Victoria's attorney called. They want to discuss settlement terms tomorrow. We've got them on the ropes." I smiled faintly, picturing Dad's reaction to this news. He'd always taught me that business wasn't about crushing opponents, but about standing firm on what was right. Victoria had miscalculated badly when she assumed I hadn't learned that lesson well. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, settlement discussions, company decisions, the ongoing criminal investigation. But tonight, for the first time since Dad's Death, I felt a measure of peace. The truth was emerging. Justice was being served, and somewhere, I hoped, Dad knew that his final, desperate efforts to protect his legacy hadn't been in vain. 6 months passed, with remarkable swiftness. The seasons changed, summer fading to autumn, then winter, and now the first hints of spring appearing in Portland's gardens. Standing in front of Bennett Construction's headquarters, I surveyed the new sign being installed. Still the same company name, but now with a subtle addition. Founded by Robert Bennett, 1985. The settlement negotiations with Victoria had been surprisingly brief. Faced with mounting evidence and the district attorney's ongoing criminal investigation, she'd ultimately accepted a fraction of what she'd initially demanded. Enough for a comfortable life, but nothing close to the windfall she'd schemed for. In exchange, she'd signed away all claims to Dad's estate and the company. Her criminal case was proceeding separately. The DA had filed charges of elder abuse, fraud, and improper administration of controlled substances. Victoria had pleaded not guilty, but her former lawyer, Martin Graves, facing disbarment and potential charges himself, had already begun cooperating with prosecutors, providing details of how the fraudulent will had been created. Inside the building, the mood was energetic as staff prepared for this afternoon's ceremony. We were breaking ground on our largest project yet, a sustainable mixed-use development that would transform a former industrial site into affordable housing, retail spaces, and a community center. Dad had dreamed of this project for years, submitting proposal after proposal until the city finally approved it just weeks before his diagnosis. "Looking good out there," Charlie said, approaching with coffee mugs in hand. Though technically semi-retired now, he still came by most days, his decades of experience an invaluable resource as I navigated my first year as CEO. "Thanks," I said, accepting the coffee. "Hard to believe it's been 6 months already." Charlie nodded, understanding what I didn't say. 6 months since the court battle, since Victoria's schemes were exposed, since I'd truly begun to process Dad's death without the cloud of betrayal hanging over everything. "Found something interesting yesterday," he said, pulling an envelope from his jacket. "Was going through some old files and came across this." Inside was a photograph I'd never seen before. Dad and me at maybe 8 years old, both wearing hard hats and standing proudly in front of a foundation being poured. My first job site visit. "He kept that in his desk for years," Charlie explained. "Said it was the day he knew for sure you'd take over someday." I studied the image, noting Dad's proud expression and my own childish excitement. I remember that day. He explained every single step of the concrete pour, probably bored me to tears, but he was so passionate about it. "That was Robert," Charlie said with a soft laugh. "Detail-oriented to a fault." Janet appeared in the doorway. "Michael, the mayor's office called. She'll meet us at the site at 2 o'clock. "Thanks, Janet." I tucked the photograph carefully into my wallet. "We should head over soon to make sure everything's ready." The groundbreaking site was bustling with activity when we arrived. Staff setting up chairs, media positioning cameras, city officials mingling with our project partners. This development was significant not just for Bennett Construction, but for Portland itself, promising to revitalize a neglected area while addressing the city's housing shortage. I made my rounds, thanking everyone for their contributions to making this day possible. So many people had stepped up during the difficult months after Dad's death, keeping projects on track while I dealt with legal battles and emotional turmoil. Their loyalty had been one of the greatest gifts in a time of tremendous upheaval. The ceremony itself was brief but meaningful. The mayor spoke about community renewal, affordable housing, and the Bennett family's long commitment to Portland's growth. I said a few words about Dad's vision for projects that served people, not just profit margins, and how this development embodied that philosophy perfectly. As I pushed the ceremonial shovel into the earth, surrounded by city officials and our team, I felt Dad's presence more strongly than I had since his death. This project had been his dream, and now it was becoming reality under my leadership, exactly as he'd always intended. After the formal proceedings, as staff and guests mingled, over refreshments, Dr. Matthews approached. He'd become an unexpected ally in recent months, testifying not only in our civil case, but also providing crucial evidence for the criminal proceedings against Victoria. "Congratulations," he said, shaking my hand. "Robert would be proud of this." "Thank you for coming," I replied sincerely, "and for everything you've done. Without your testimony—" He waved off my gratitude. "I only wish I'd done more while he was still with us. Pushed harder when I saw the warning signs. You did what you could. We all did." This was a hard-won peace I'd made with myself, as well, acknowledging that Victoria's deception had been skillful, that none of us could have foreseen the lengths to which she'd go. After the guests departed, I walked the perimeter of the property alone, visualizing what would stand here in 18 months' time. Homes for families, spaces for small businesses, a playground designed with input from local children. My phone buzzed with a text from Sullivan. "Judge signed final probate order today. All official now. Congratulations." With that simple message, the last legal hurdle was cleared. Dad's original will was fully validated. The company officially mine. To lead, Victoria's attempt to hijack his legacy had failed completely. That evening I drove to the cemetery as sunset painted the sky in shades of pink and gold. I hadn't visited as often as I should have, sometimes finding the carved reminder of Dad's absence too painful to face. But today felt different. A day of culmination and new beginnings. At his grave, I placed fresh flowers beside the simple headstone he would have preferred to anything elaborate. "It's official, Dad," I said quietly. "Bennett Construction continues exactly as you planned. Victoria's settlement is finalized. The DA thinks her criminal case is solid." A gentle breeze rustled the newly leafed trees overhead. We broke ground. On the Riverside project today, full house, mayor, city council, even that reporter from the Business Journal who always gave you a hard time. I smiled at the memory. The whole team stepped up to make it happen, just like you taught us. I described the project plans, the company's strong financial position, the new sustainability initiatives we were implementing, all conversations we should have had together, plans we should have developed side by side. "I'm trying to run things the way you would," I admitted. "Sometimes I still reach for the phone to ask your advice before remembering I can't." The grief had changed shape over these months, less raw but still present, a companion rather than an overwhelming force. As twilight deepened, I placed a hand on the cool stone. "I want you to know that I understand now why you fought so hard. At the end, why you hid that flash drive, recorded that video, left all those clues. It wasn't just about the company or the money." My voice caught slightly. "It was about the truth, about making sure I knew you never stopped believing in me." On the drive home, I felt a sense of closure that had been elusive these past months. The legal battles were behind us. Victoria's schemes had been exposed. The company was thriving. Most importantly, Dad's true intentions and faith in me had been validated beyond any doubt. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: construction timelines, hiring decisions, strategy meetings. The responsibility of leading Bennett Construction remained substantial. But for the first time since that day in the lawyer's office, when Victoria had claimed my inheritance, I felt fully ready for that responsibility, grounded in the knowledge that I was carrying forward exactly what Dad had built, exactly as he'd intended. His final gift hadn't been the company itself, but the determination to fight for the truth, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. That lesson would guide me forward, shaping not just how I ran Bennett Construction, but how I lived my life. with the same integrity, perseverance, and care for others that had defined my father's legacy. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.